Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Svarim Chatter podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be joined by Professor Manekin, who is a professor of Jewish studies at the University of Maryland. And we'll be discussing her newest book, which is titled The Rebellion of the Daughters, Jewish Women Runaways in Habsburg Galicia, which is from Princeton University Press. So thank you, Professor Manekin, for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start off. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your background?
Okay, so I grew up in Bnei Brak. I went to Bes Yaakov from primary through high school and seminary. Bes Yaakov in Tel Aviv, that's the Sharansky seminary. That's how it's known for. I later went to the university. I first studied, not knowing what I wanted, computer science, later philosophy. And then I discovered history, and that really became a passion for me. I'm a historian of Galician Jewry, Galicianers. Galicia was originally part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and after the first partition of Poland in 1772, it was annexed to the to the Habsburg Empire, later called the Austro-Hungarian Empire. My PhD in Jewish history is from Hebrew University, and my doctoral thesis, which became my first book in Hebrew, was on the first Orthodox political party in modern time, the Machzikei Hadas Society, which was founded with the support of the Belzer Rebbe and Rav Shimon Schreiber, Rav Shimon Sofer, who was the Rabbi of Krakow and the son of the Hatam Sofer. In fact, Rabbi Schreiber was elected in 1879 as a representative of Machzikei Hadas to the Austrian parliament. This was a few decades before the establishment of the Agudat Israel. So it's really the first Orthodox political party is Machzikei Hadas.
Okay, so how did you get interested in the current book, in the Jewish Runaways, the Runaway? How did that come about?
Yeah, so before writing my book, I didn't know anything about the hundreds of girls who ran away from home, most of them Orthodox girls, and converted to Catholicism in Krakow around the turn of the 20th century. I discovered this phenomenon by accident, as all good things, when I was in one of the archives in Krakow working on another project, and I came across a file with formal notifications of girls who intend to convert. And I started digging and saw that the runaway phenomenon was widespread in Galicia, and it had been discussed extensively in the Jewish and non-Jewish press, even in the Austrian parliament, but nobody really had written about it, at least not since World War II. So I decided to start investigating this. Who were those girls? Why did they run away? And what was the response of the Jewish community and the state? A lot of the parents sometimes claimed that their daughters were kidnapped and coerced to convert by the church. So this raised all sorts of interesting questions. After all, unlike Russia, and this is important, Jews in the Habsburg Empire, including Galician Jews, were citizens with equal rights to all others. So what was going on here? What is this whole business with the church and the convent, and why were the girls running away? And it appears that in many cases, the immediate cause was their disinterest in marrying the boys chosen for them by their parents, often Hasidim. And those guys that the parents chose for them had only a religious education, something that those girls didn't value, because they had been Polishly, but not Jewishly educated. But I find out something else that explained the phenomenon by studying police and court files. And police and court files are a wonderful source to hear voices of women, since most women at this time, especially Orthodox women, didn't write. So according to the Habsburg law, individuals were considered minors until age 24 and under their parents' authority. Since most Orthodox Galician Jews didn't marry according to state laws, their marriages were not recognized. So even if the girls were married, they were still considered under the parents' authority. But according to another Habsburg law, a person could decide to convert to another religion, doesn't matter Jew or Christian, starting at age 14. A child, I don't know, a young person at age 14 was considered as somebody who could already decide to what religion he want to belong. So conversion was arguably a safe way for girls who wanted to leave their homes, because even though a girl was still under her parents' authority, if she was less than 14, and those girls who ran away, they were most of them were between the age of 15 and 21, 22. So girls found out that they can run to the convent and stay there for a few months to prepare for their conversion. Where else could they go at this time? This is the end of the 19th century. There were no support groups or anything similar. Catholicism wasn't alien to them because of schooling, and we'll talk about schools later. They also lived in a Catholic society. And the church also later found jobs for them, usually as governors in good Catholic homes, so to speak. So this is when I started working on this project. Those are the first elements that I found. Yeah.
So before we go a little deeper into some of those, I think the first thing to mention to listeners is, I mean, you said it's in Galicia. Where in Galicia are we talking about here? And also, what years mainly are you looking at for this?
Okay. So this phenomenon was more spread in Western Galicia, around the Krakow area. In the book, I explain why in Western Galicia. While Eastern Galicia was multinational, multi-religious, Western Galicia was Polish in terms of the ethnicity of the population, of the non-Jews, and Catholic. So the pressure also, especially in schools and so on, was quite, emphasized. Whereas in Eastern Galicia, with Lemberg, Lviv, Lvov as its capital, there were Ruthenians, Ukrainians there, Armenians, Germans, and so on. Western Galicia, with Krakow as its capital, is almost exclusively Polish and Catholic. And we're talking about the years late 1870s until World War I, turn of the century, before and after.
Okay, so now we get to the girls, and you mentioned really the schooling. That's a big deal. So what was the I'll already mention here, the last chapter in your book is going to be about Beis Yaakov and the preceding movements, and then the change in education. But we're obviously before that. So what was going on? What was the state of Jewish female education at the time, especially as opposed to male education? What was going on? And then obviously, you'll mention how that played a big factor in what was going on here.
Yeah, so I'll start again with the law. I'm a big believer in understanding the legal situation at any given time. So again, unlike in the Russian Empire, Austria published, or the Austro-Hungarian Empire at this time, published a mandatory education law in 1868. And a few years later, 1873, there was also a Galician version of this law, where the Austrian law required 8 years of schooling. The Galician law required only 6 years of schooling. So the Orthodox population had no opposition in sending their daughters to schools. There were no Jewish schools at that time. So depending on their socioeconomic status, they would send them either to public school, they were all Polish schools, or to private schools if they were rich. In terms of, by the way, in all schools, I don't want it to be perceived as secular schools, because the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Galicia in particular were religious states. Religion was very important. So saying that they were secularized in school is really inaccurate. It was really Catholic. They celebrated the Catholic religious holidays and so on. There were mandatory religion classes, 2 hours a week, a minimum of 2 hours a week. And when there were enough Jewish students, there were also classes of the Jewish religion, but the teachers were colonized Jews. In most cases, they were not Orthodox teachers. So it starts with schooling, and the reason why parents had no, and even the religious leadership had no problem sending the girls to school, because first of all, there are no clear halachic instructions about secular studies for girls. It's not prohibited halachically, as far as I know, and I looked into it a lot, because it's not Bitul Torah, so it was not a problem. In terms of the religious education, there was no formal Jewish religious education for girls. They studied either at home from their mothers, and families who were well off, they would hire tutors, teaching them the prayers, the brachot, reading the Hebrew letters, so they could daven, but they didn't understand what they were saying unless they would look in the Sidurim with Yiddish explanations. So we get really a gap between the Polish schoolings, where their intellectual achievements were respected. They spoke Polish to their friends, and then they came home to Yiddish-speaking families where the parents didn't have any idea of what this schooling experience is, because the parents, almost in all cases, never went to school. It was before the law was published. So we get this uneven type of situation between which creates a conflict between parents and children, and difficulties for the girls who live really in a bifurcated type of world.
I mean, just to emphasize a little more, I mean, when they went to these schools, I mean, you want to just give some examples. What were they studying there versus as to what to be expected at home?
Well, there was the law had listed, they studied math, they studied Polish history, they studied Polish geography, they studied literature. What your average primary school would offer to students. Interesting is Sarah Schneer also went to she went to a public school. She didn't come from a well-off family. She loved her school, and she also attended the religion classes at her school. In my book, I give the name of the religion teacher in her school. She attended those classes, so she had that, how would I say, experience of living into walls during your childhood.
Right. Okay. So this was, like you said already, there was a divide. And now not only was a divide, well, we can mention this here already, there was a divide between the boys and the girls, because the boys did not go. I mean, I don't know if you explained enough why the boys were not going to these schools, but the girls were. And then obviously when it came time to get married, there was this massive gap.
Yeah. So the boys, parents didn't want to send the boys, Orthodox parents, and Galicia is mostly Hasidic. So it's not a Hasidic phenomenon, but it just happened that the Orthodox population is mostly Hasidic. Since they had a voting power, and they had Machzikei Adat, they had Askanim, operatives, and so on. They had all kinds of arrangements with the Poles had only one party, the Polish club in the Austrian parliament. So the arrangement, they committed to vote for the Poles. And indeed, almost all Orthodox voted for the Polish party. And in exchange for that, the Polish authorities turned a blind eye to what they do with their sons. In addition, especially in cities, towns, and urban areas where the Jewish population was quite large, the Poles didn't want Orthodox boys, especially Hasidic boys, with the way they look, dominating their schools. So they were happy. In addition to political deals, they were happy to have them outside of the schools. So that kind of worked for them. And I should say most of the Orthodox boys continue to go to the Cheder. There were some cases where they took as external students the final exams. But in most cases, they continue to attend the Cheder with the Poles just, not making a big deal out of it. Even though parents who didn't follow the law, there were fines imposed on them. But that's how they got around it.
So what was the rabbinic response to this? Or was this just inaction? There was no response from the Rabbanim and the Rebbes because they didn't think there was an issue? Or what happened when they realized there was an issue?
So there wasn't really a response. There was in 1903, there was a big international rabbinic assembly, but it was not only for Galician Jews, so I won't talk about that. Once the press started reporting about this phenomenon, and this starts in 1900, was the first case that I discussed in my book of Michalina Araten. In different Jewish newspapers, there were all kinds of suggestions how to solve this problem of the runaway girls. And I would say moderate Orthodox newspapers, mostly with a nationalist orientation, like Hamagid and Hamitzpeh, they blamed the Orthodox society for doing nothing with their girls, and they called for the establishment of schools for girls where they would be taught Hebrew and Chumash and Jewish history. So it became a solution that was kind of associated with the more with nationalistic Jews. And the Orthodox press and Machzikei Adat also had a newspaper, also called Machzikei Adat. They said that there is no problem with the education we give our daughters. The only problem is that we give them too much over what is required by law of secular education. We have to do the minimum, and what they learn in home is enough. So even in the newspapers, there is no, there was sometimes they were called Aval Hashemim Anachnu Al Bnotenu, it's our fault, but the solution was never schools. Yeah.
So before we get to the three main specific stories that you discuss in your book, how many how many? I mean, what were the number? Do we know exactly how many of these runaways were there? Do we know a kind of a number of
Yes,
what was going on?
yes. So the material is there are three national archives in Krakow. I think the building is already finished. It's all now going to be housed in one location. I managed to put down a list of over 300 girls with their names, with the names of their parents, when they were born, where they came from. So I have around 320 girls in the list. And I imagine there were some more that went under the radar because there was a whole civil procedure for conversion. One had to fill out all kind of forms, deliver it to state authorities, and so on. That's why we have all these names. And in several cases, people approach me asking. After reading the book or a view of the book, told me they have a story of an aunt or whatever, and in some cases I found them in the list. So yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, so why did you decide to structure the book? The structure of the book is the introduction, and then, like I said, there's the Beis Yaakov, and we'll talk about that. That's at the end. But in the middle of the bulk of the book is these three stories. Why did you decide to discuss, structure the book that way, focus so much on these specific stories?
Yeah. So what I did, it's referred to in history as micro histories, and the reason why I did it was because I found 3 files, police files, court files, government correspondence, very detailed about those cases. Not in all elements, but I see them as typical cases. But it's, as I said, because I came across this serial, which really each collection of archival documents, it gives you a story, and you can follow their life trajectory. So
okay,
that's why I chose them.
So now we can get to the story. So the first story you already alluded to, Michalina Ratten. So let's talk about this story. What happened there?
Yeah. So this became the most famous story. It was reported in Australia in the London Times. It became a huge story, and I'll give some reason why it happened. So Michalina Ratten, she's called in the documents also Mechla. I'm not familiar with a Jewish name, Mechla. I know Mechel is a man's name, but Mechla, I'm not familiar with that. But I guess in school she was called Michalina. She was a daughter of a very wealthy and prominent Ger Hasidic family in Krakow. She was sent by her parents to a fancy Polish school, a sort of a Finnish school. In the advertisement for the schools in the Polish press, it's all in Polish, but there's one line in English. It's called an English school for young ladies. So this is where her parents sent her. It was all, it reflected the socioeconomic status of the parents. They took her out after she completed the 6th grade. That was the minimum in Galicia. Her parents also provided her with music lessons. In some of the letters, she writes about how she used to go to her music teacher. And then on the Sabbath of December 30, 1899, when her parents came home from synagogue, she was not home, and the maid informed her that she left to town. The father went looking for her the whole day, couldn't find her. And the next day, he went with a policeman to that convent where all those girls found refuge. So he knew that when your daughter disappears, this is where you go. And he received a positive answer. The convent claimed that she entered the convent voluntarily. The father, Israel Aratin, he claimed that she was led there by the washerwoman. By the way, I'll add in parentheses, the washerwoman lived in the same building as Sarah Schnierer, and she was interrogated several times. So Schnierer was aware, not just because of the press report, it really happened in her building. He also claims that she was not 14 years old, that she's 13, which means that the convent is keeping her illegally. That's a whole, I can't get into it. The question of her age is complicated. The father came to the convent about 10 times. He wanted to see her, but she refused to see him. And she met her grandparents and her aunt in the convent. The mother was sick. The father asked her to come, even as a policeman, to guarantee that she'll go back to see her mother, but she refused. She said that the mother should come to the convent. The father sent several doctors to check her in the convent, and he also checked the most famous psychiatrist in Krakow to the convent to check her mental condition. She later claimed in a letter that his intention was to commit her to a mental institution as a way to get her out of the convent. The father is really a hero in this story. He went to a great length, including meeting with the Emperor Franz Joseph. He's the only parent who got the audience with the Emperor. He met government ministers. He hired private investigators, several lawyers, and he kept the story alive in the press. He was convinced because he paid money for tips, and he got tips from all kinds of locations. So he was convinced that she was just transferred from one convent to another, because after, I forgot to say that, a month after she entered the convent, she disappeared. She left a letter for her father, which he didn't pick up. And then he searched for her, and he was convinced that she is in Galicia, transferred from one convent to another. But as it turns out, she was taken to a convent in a place like, Chebinia. It's close to Chebin. I was there in that convent. It's like half an hour outside of Krakow. She was baptized there. It was all arranged by the Felician Sister Convent, the first one where she was kept. And then she was smuggled outside of the country. She was given a new name. And she was first in Belgium and then in Posen and Poznan. By the time her father located her, she was Catholic, she was married, and she was already a mother. So that's end of this saga.
So just two follow-up questions. First of all, do we know exactly why she ran away and converted?
So she left several letters. One for her father. She wrote them in Polish, so apparently she couldn't write in Yiddish. And all those letters are kept in the court file. But when he wanted to pick up the letters, the nuns wanted the police to be present there because they wanted to make sure that he wasn't going to use the letter against them. So they wanted a policeman to be there, present there, and for him to read the letter out loud. And he refused, so the letter was transferred to the court. In the letter, she tells him, she talks about the age, which she claims that she was not 14 yet. and she talks about the psychiatrist. And she said she understood that he wanted to commit her to a mental institution. There were also 2 letters that she wrote, and this is another element in the stories that I discovered in the police and the court files. She became, there was a military officer, doctor, who lived across from her home. And he noticed that she keeps on standing by her window and looking at his apartment. And then he saw a note. At the end of the story, they twice they went out together with another girl. He said that they were not alone. Was surprising. They took a stroll in the park where everybody could see them. And when this is according to the military doctor, he said that when her father found out about this, he beat her. And as a result, he stopped all contacts with her because he didn't want her to be beaten on his account. And in the letter, in one of the letters that she writes him, she tells him that her father came over. She gives the date, and he told her, "You're 15 already, and I found a bridegroom for you." And she said she cried. Of course, she never met him. Nothing helped. She was supposed to get engaged in the following Sunday. The Shabbat after that, she ran away. She said, "There is no way that I'm going to be engaged to this." She called him, I'm trying to translate from German, wax puppet. This is how she called. She probably knew who he was. So according to her, this is why she ran away. She didn't want to marry this guy. And again, we have somebody like that who goes to a private Catholic school. She takes music lessons. And then her parents expect her to marry a guy who only had a religious education. There was really nothing in common with her father's expectation and her expectations.
Why did this story become so famous? Is it, like you said, is it because of the father's efforts?
So it's also the father's effort, because he kept it alive. He wrote letters all over. But that's not the only reason. Various parties latched on the story for their own purposes. The Viennese liberal politicians and newspapers, including Jewish liberals, for them it was a classic case of a church overreach. So, and the state's failure to protect the right of Jewish citizens. For the conservative Poles, especially those in Galicia, the church was wrongly accused of kidnapping her. So they talked a lot about her. This is also a time when there is a rise in anti-Semitism in this place. So anti-Semitic newspapers. Also, for them, for them it was a case of Jews using the state to attack the church. So there were all kinds of sides that wanted to use this story. And also it's a story with elements, sensational elements that made, I don't want to say good, quote unquote, story in the newspaper. We have a young girl, she was from Hasidic home. There's a love story with a military doctor. She disappears. Nobody knows where she is, because it was not, at this time, nobody knew really that she was already, out of the country. And this is really the first time in 1900, although there were already 20 years of girls running away, but nobody wrote about them. So this made it, and also the Machzikei Adas newspaper wrote a lot about her story.
Okay, so obviously there's more details in the book that you go into that people can read it there. So now the second story that you get into is, I think, Dvorah Lefkowitz. I think if I'm pronouncing her name right. So you want to talk a little bit about that story and what was different about that story?
Yeah, so Dvorah Lefkowitz is a village girl. Her father is a tavern keeper. She has a sister and a young brother, and she works in the tavern serving beer and other things. And the reason why I wrote about her also because it's a very detailed court file, because we don't know anything about the lives of village girls, and she ended up an extremely intelligent girl. What is interesting is that she knew how to write in Yiddish. She writes to her parents in Yiddish. Her letters are in the court file, so she was probably taught by a tutor. Her parents first sent her to the village school, and then as she goes a little older, they sent her to the city school. So they obviously were interested in her getting a good education. She also, according to her testimony, and we have her testimony, her sister's testimony, the mother, the father, the neighbors, the Polish friend, she runs away for the same reason. Her parents wanted her to marry somebody that she was not interested in. She runs away literally on the eve of her wedding. She went with her mother to Krakow to get the wedding dress that they ordered. And as the mother waits for her in the hotel, she doesn't come back. So mother waits for a few hours and she goes home, and the father says right away, she's probably in the convent. They knew. She was there about 5 months. She also had a Polish lover. She was later not interested in him. The convent found for a job as a governess in the home of the administrator of the post office. So this was a good family. But her parents, the way they handled their whole situation is really admirable. They visited her. They didn't cut ties with her at all. They visited her, and the father kept pressuring her to return to Judaism. I'll make the story short. She does return to Judaism. When I say return, every conversion, as I said in the beginning, there was a civil procedure. There was no mention of any religious ceremony. She's still considered Jewish, but she had to undergo this whole give testimonies, go to the municipality, and so on. And then she spends time with her uncle in Hungary, who's also a tavern keeper. And she writes her parents letters in Yiddish. She tells them that she fasted on Yom Kippur and so on, and that the uncle found a good shidduch for her. But at the same time, she writes a letter to the convent. And she said, the Jews don't let me, attend mass and so on. So you could see the confusion. She's not in a good place. She loves her parents, so she doesn't run away from the family. She runs away from a situation she doesn't want to find herself in. I don't know what happened to her at the end.
Okay, well, another really fascinating story. Yeah. So the third story is a little different and interesting, because Anna Kluger, as we talk about, and this one is interesting because she doesn't convert. So I'll give away the ending. She doesn't convert, but there is a covenant involved. But also she sues her parents. So we'll talk a little bit about her story.
Yeah. So Anna Ochaya is her Jewish name. They lived in what was then a suburb of Krakow. Now it's part of Krakow, Podgorze. And realizing that they have a brilliant daughter, they sent her to one of the best schools in the city. Very rigorous program of studies. When she finished primary school, she wanted to continue and study in a high school. Her mother, I have to say, I didn't mention, her mother is a Halberstam. She's a direct descendant of the founder of the Tzan's dynasty, the Divrei Chaim Halberstam. So she's really a direct descendant. And as is often in cases like this, she married a very rich guy. So they're really, according to the press, they're millionaires. And when she's 15, her parents engage her to a guy who's 14 years old. In the beginning, she resists, but her mother tells her that once she gets married, it will be easier for her to continue her studies. So she acquiesces. 2 years later, she gets married with him. She tells her husband on the first night that she won't live with him as a wife. And she continues to study. She takes her matriculation exam as an external student in one of the high schools, female high schools in Krakow. She registers also at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow. But her life becomes impossible because her mother senses that something is wrong between her and her husband, and she interferes in her intimate life, and she decides to run away. She takes her younger sister with her. By the way, even after what happened to her, her parents sent her younger sister also to this type of rigorous school. You know, we used to this idea that everything needs to be harmonious, the education at home. This wasn't the case. It's difficult to get into the mindset, but this is what I think, because otherwise, why would they do the same as the younger sister? And they decide to run away. She takes valuables, all the jewelry that she got for her wedding, cash, and so on. They hide in a convent again, because that's the only place that young women could find shelter. And she takes a lawyer, a socialist lawyer, and they sue the parents in the local court, demanding that he allows them to continue to study, for her to go to the university, and cover all their expenses, and also live outside the home. As far as the law is considered, she's not considered married because it was only a religious marriage. So she's 24 under the authority of the father. She loses in the local court and she takes it to the Supreme Court in Vienna. And of course, even in the parliament, the question is, can one coerce the father to send the daughter to a university? Women were admitted to universities in the Habsburg Empire only in 1897. So the whole thing is still new for women. But at the end, she wins her case. She later continues her studies at the University of Vienna. She gets her PhD in history. One of the first women, I should say, because a lot of women studied pedagogy and so on. And when she finished, and she goes back to Krakow, she marries. But by that time, she's not married anymore to her first husband, who got a get of 100 rabbanim, because he couldn't deliver the get to her because they didn't know where she's hiding. She marries one of the most famous socialists in Krakow. There's a lot written about him, nothing about her, although the press is full. Again, the press find in this story such, sensational elements. Also, legal journals write about her story. So she becomes a teacher in what's called the Hebrew Gymnasium, the Hebrew high school. It's a Jewish high school. It's not a religious, not anti-religious, but it's not a religious high school. And she and her husband were killed in the Holocaust. So that's her story. I tried to learn more about her sister, and I got to a relative in Israel, but it was a week after somebody from the family, her niece died a week before, so I couldn't find out about her. And what I have from her is her whole petition to the Supreme Court, in which she tells her story, the sister's story, all the testimonies, and so on. So it really opens us up to the lives of women like her. And it's important for me to say, because, sometimes the ideas, people say, oh, they were drawn to all kinds of, socialists, Zionists, they read literature. There were also women who are intellectually driven. And she is an example of that. And it's important to recognize that. All she wanted is to study.
Right, and maybe that has something to do with her schooling, that she wanted to just continue. And these are three fascinating stories and sad. And they definitely, like I said, they're like a microhistory, some sort of snapshot of what unfortunately was going on until we get to the final chapter of your book.
Yeah, well, one more thing. It was, since you used the word sad, it was very sad for her parents because they were really ashamed. At one point, they asked their lawyer to write a whole article and send it to the Neue Freie Presse, the most important newspaper in Vienna, and tell their side of the story, because they were portrayed in the press as fanatics and so on. And they said, we gave her all the educations that middle-class people give their daughters. So they try to, preserve their reputation. It was, and once it got to families like this, rabbinic families, known families, it was clear to everyone that this cannot continue. When it happened with village girls, nobody cared. But to a Halberstams, that's another story. Yeah.
So then let's talk about that change. So the change really comes about, as you discussed, during World War I and then after World War I. What takes place that suddenly we get to these, I think, what was it, Chavatzelet, and then Telas and Yavne, and then there's Beis Yaakov. How do we get to what changes? What happens there?
So first of all, the war. The war caused the disaffection of Orthodox youth. There was dislocation. People found themselves as refugees. Yeshivas were closed. Rabbis, that the whole fabric of Jewish life was destroyed. And at times like this, usually this is again, quote unquote, a good time to introduce changes, because you can't return to what was before once everything is destroyed. And in Eastern Europe, especially because the occupation, the German occupation in part of Poland, in Warsaw and in Lithuania, we get neo-Orthodox rabbiner doctors who come. So you mentioned Chavatzelet in 1917, the same year as Sarah Schneer opens up her little afternoon school. They established a high school for girls, Chavatzelet. The Ger Rebbe didn't oppose, and in the daily Aguda press, there are advertisements for Chavatzelet every day. As I said, the time is ripe for change. In Lithuania, we first have in Tels, the first high school for girls, where the religious studies are taught in Hebrew. So this is different than Lithuania is a different story. It really demands a different treatment. There were three high schools for girls, all called Yavne schools, and the first one in Tels, the second one in Kovno, and the third one in Ponevezh. So in the Tels, they had some of the teachers were the neo-Orthodox Bahurim who came to study during the war, some of them when they served in the German army. In the yeshiva, some of them with PhD, and in the beginning, they taught the girls in the school. There was also a teacher's seminary attached to the Tels yeshiva. So everywhere in Eastern Europe, it's a time for change, not only for girls' education, also for boys' education, which is not my expertise. And then we have in Krakow with Sarah Schnierer. So the Germans don't come, the Neo-Orthodox, they don't come to Krakow, but she goes, the opposite way. She goes to Vienna. And this is when this idea of establishing a girls' school comes into her mind. And when she comes back, that's what she's doing. I want to emphasize that at least in the beginning, everything that she does with rabbinic approval. Because there was some, that said that she did it despite opposition. There was no opposition. She consults with a Belzer Rebbe. Everybody is familiar with that, even though I now have another version of that, but I can't go into it now. She consults with a Bobova Rebbe. So she doesn't do anything against. She asks rabbis before every step. She's very careful.
And how much of this, especially Sarah Schnierer and Basiakov, how much was a reaction to what we discussed, what had been going on, what she saw, what had been occurring beforehand?
So the way I see it, as I said before, she was really in her neighborhood. So I see her also as a sort of a rebellious daughter, like the other one. She goes against the grain. She does something that she finds another solution. For the other girls, they just left. For her, she's trying to mend the situation. So for her too, the existing situation is not something that can continue. And she goes back in 1917. It ends up that Krakow wasn't a war scene, so she could go back earlier. But of course, all her education was she only had primary school, so she doesn't have the skills needed to open a school. We call it a school, but strictly speaking, it's not a school. It's an afternoon programs for girls who go to a Polish school in the morning. And then, of course, 1918 is the Second Polish Republic, the end of the Habsburg Empire, and the conversion law, everything that we discussed before, they don't apply to Poland. So the girls can't run away to a convent, knock on the door, and find shelter there. This is over with because of the no political situation.
Right. Okay. And like I said, you do go more in depth in this in the book in the last chapter. And obviously, for all that we've discussed, I'll put the link in the show's notes to the book so people can purchase the book. Finally, I want to ask you about what you're working on now. I know you mentioned something related. I think you just worked on something related to our conversation that maybe you wanted to discuss.
Yeah. So after the book was published, I became aware of an existence of an extreme rare source, a diary by a young woman whose father had studied in the Chafetz Chaim's yeshiva and later worked as a fundraiser for the yeshiva. The diary is written in a beautiful Maskili Hebrew. It spans the year 1924 till 1936, over 500 pages. And there are around 160 pages devoted to her time in the Beis Yaakov seminary in Krakow. And the pictures that, and later she becomes a Beis Yaakov teacher in several cities in Poland. The diary is fascinating for several reasons. It is the only diary, extensive diary, of a Beis Yaakov seminary student. And also she is critical of the institution. So we get a less idealized picture and more details and stories about the different teachers, about how they were taught, what were the religious expectations of the girls when they left they left for holidays or whatever. But what was particularly interesting for me, she lives not far from Vilna, and this area was like a former Lithuanian region that was annexed to Poland after World War I. She considers herself a Lithuanian. She looks down at the Polish girls, which for her are Hasidic daughters. That's how she said they're immature. I treat them like little girls and so on. And I'll call them Lithuanian too, although it's part of Poland. The Lithuanian girls, almost all of them, were sent for primary school to Talmud school, which was a Zionist school network. I also know, I have personal knowledge. This is one of the Rashi Yeshiva of Ponevezh. He was from Grodno. He was sent to the Mir, but his sisters were sent, again, this is personal knowledge. His sisters were sent to Talmud school. She first went to the Talmud teacher seminary for 2 years. It's a 5 years seminary. After 2 years, her father got worried and he registered her in the Krakow seminary. And because they went to Talmud, all the Lithuanian students, they know Hebrew. They have textual skills. The Hasidic girls don't have those skills. And this creates a lot of problems in the seminary, which, as I said, I write about it in a forthcoming article. So we have this divide between Hasidic and Litvish, or Yeshivish, as now they call it, also among women, which was I didn't realize that before, that it existed so early.
Wow, that's indeed amazing to see. Is this diary, is it available for anyone to read or no?
So the truth is that it was published by her son in a limited, just for families and friends. There is only one copy in the National Library, but nobody knew about it. So the story how I discovered it is complicated. It's a long story. So I got in touch with her son. I'm going to meet him next week. We were in touch for a whole year. So it was available, but it was unknown. And as I said, it's only in one place. I'm going to try to bring it to the US for several academic libraries. So, because it's just a fantastic source. She also writes a lot about her father, general education, and so on. So you learn a lot from that.
Maybe you should make an English translation of it.
If somebody, it's my wish that, I don't know, maybe a doctoral student, whatever, I think it's worth, also her experience as a Bes Yaakov teacher. I'll just add one thing. I don't know how much time we have left. When she's a teacher in a city called Shedlitz, she befriends a Hasidic daughter. She doesn't call them Hasidic women or Hasidic girls, Hasidic daughters, who was the sister of Baruch Rabinowitz, who married the only daughter of the Munkacher. And later he became the Munkacher Rebbe. And it's very interesting what they do together. They go to movies. It's not what we think of the Orthodox life between the wars. So it's not just a Bes Yaakov element, but it tells us a lot. She writes when she went to the seminary from her home, it was a long trip. They would all sit together with a yeshiva bachurim who went to Baranovich. They sat together in the train, they talked, and then, the Baranovich stopped, the Baranovich bachurim left, but they had contacts. It's a completely different world. Sort of reminds me about the making of a gadol type of story.
So I guess we'll stay tuned for the article. And Are you, just one final question, are you working on a new book now or no?
Yes, so I have already drafts of 4 chapters. I'm going back to Galicia, to the Galicianers at my main interest, and it will be arranged according to topics of Galicia from the beginning, from the annexation of Galicia to Austria, 1772, till the Constitution in 1867. It will be about the religious life, communal lives, contacts with the governments and so on. So that's my next big project.
Okay, very interesting. So thank you, Professor Manekin, once again for joining me, and I will put the link to people can purchase the book in the show's notes.
Well, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk about the things that I'm passionate about. I have to say, yeah.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you once again.